Hey metalheads, today we're diving deep into the gritty, angst-ridden world of nu metal. So break out those Jinko jeans and let's talk about the subgenre of heavy metal that causes more fights than who gets the last steak at steak night at the Golden Corral. So before we can get into like the bands and the albums and everything, we gotta talk about what is nu metal. Basically, nu metal, it's just a subgenre of heavy metal, but what makes it different is that it combines elements of alternative rock, grunge, and probably one of the biggest things that separates it is the hip-hop element that's added to it. That hip-hop element, yeah, it was kind of blended before. There was maybe a few instances where maybe hip-hop was used kind of combined with either rock or metal. Probably one of the biggest ones you can think of is Aerosmith and Run DMC doing Walk This Way. That could kind of almost be considered maybe the very first instance of nu metal, but it was a very one-off thing. It never really kind of developed into its own subgenre. Anthrax was also known to combine elements of hip-hop with Public Enemy. They collaborated on some songs, and then Anthrax even did their own kind of hip-hop songs as well, like I'm the Man. Probably one of the biggest references that they used hip-hop in their music making. Nu metal, there's also that kind of that anger and that aggression that goes along with those other elements of funk and hip-hop that causes nu metal to be just a little bit different and made it its own subgenre. Another big difference with nu metal that kind of separates itself from other metal is the lack of guitar solos. You really don't hear too many guitar solos in nu metal. Yeah, you get the breakdown and you probably get a bridge, but you're not getting some lead guitars wailing like 16th or 32nd notes really high on the fretboard like you would like maybe Kirk Hammett or Kerry King from Slayer doing those guitar solos. That kind of is what keeps nu metal kind of make its own subgenres, those different kind of elements. All right, so let's talk pioneers. Nope, not that kind of pioneers. I'm talking about the bands that kind of really kicked off nu metal. I'm talking like Korn, Limp Bizkit, Cold Chamber, Deftones. Those bands were kind of the pioneers of this nu metal genre. And of course, I think everyone would probably agree, and no one would really argue, that Korn was really the band that really started the full-on nu metal movement as we know it today. They came on the scene kind of about the mid-90s, and at the time, everyone was saying heavy metal's dead, it's gone, it's forever gone, grunge is now the thing. And while that is kind of true in the mainstream way, metal never died. It's never died, it's never gone away, it's just always been there. It's just maybe not in the mainstream like it was in the 80s, early 90s, especially with the hair metal and the glam metal that was really prevalent in the 80s. But around that time, really the only metal bands that were kind of getting mainstream airplay were Pantera, Metallica, maybe a Megadeth song or two, but that's where metal was kind of at. And then Korn comes on the scene, and the mainstream hip-hop is also starting to become extremely mainstream in the 90s, and you have these guys from Bakersfield, California with their baggy pants and dreadlocks and different outfits, guitars down-tuned, and just playing weird just tones. Of course, Jonathan Davis with his Are You Ready? And I mean, it was almost kind of foreshadowing, telling you like, are you ready for this new subgenre that's coming? Are you ready for what we are about to bring? And at the time, no one really knew what it was. I mean, they knew it wasn't really grunge. It wasn't really just alternative rock. It was heavier than that. It was more aggressive. So they knew it was metal, but it wasn't that traditional metal that we've been hearing for years and years. Blast beats, fast guitar, shredding guitar solos, some vocals screaming, some growling. It was just different. And that's what Korn kind of did. They brought that on, which really kind of kicked that off and makes them really the first band of nu metal, kind of that pioneering band. Deftones also around that time coming out. Now, I'll be honest, I was not a big Deftones fan, and I really still am not much of a Deftones fan, but that's my own opinion. I know tons of people that absolutely love Deftones, and I'll be honest, maybe I should go see them live, because I've heard their live show is amazing, and maybe that would make me a fan. I don't know. But Deftones to me just I didn't really get into them. Let me know in the comments what you think about Deftones. Was that a band that you were really into? Was it a band that, it's kind of considered a pioneer of nu metal, but it just didn't do anything for me? I'd love to hear your comments and things. But then Limp Bizkit. And Limp Bizkit, also another pioneer band, but I feel like they really took that nu metal to that next level. Fred Durst really, with his vocal style that he was able to do on his albums, was just different than what Jonathan Davis was doing. Of course, their debut album, $3 Bill Y'all, had the cover of Faith, which kind of just went like a hit overnight. But to me, it was that second album, the Significant Other album, that defined Limp Bizkit. And I'll be honest, I was a fan of that album. That, to this day, honestly, is still my favorite Limp Bizkit album, and I will still listen to it. Limp Bizkit, Korn, Deftones, kind of your pioneer bands in that nu metal genre. And as far as for Korn, that debut album, it is sick. I remember I was in high school and someone kept telling me, like, hey, you gotta check out Korn, I think you're gonna like it. I borrowed the cassette from a friend, and it was different. It blew me away. I wasn't sure what I was fully listening to. I knew it was kind of sounded very metal, just because of the mixing and the guitar sounds and the drums. But it didn't sound like the thrash metal that I was really into back in the 90s, like Metallica and Slayer, those thrash metal bands that I really enjoyed. I enjoyed that debut album, but Follow the Leader, I mean, there's a reason that album just took off, and some of their biggest hits, Freak on a Leash, is probably Korn's biggest single, in my opinion. That album was amazing. And out of Korn's library, for me, Follow the Leader is still my favorite. I know they've done so much more, and I love a lot of songs off other albums, but I always tend to, whenever I feel like I want to listen to Korn, I'm either listening to their debut self-titled album or I'm listening to Follow the Leader. So while Korn, Limp Bizkit, Deftones, Cold Chamber, they were all kind of like the pioneers, some other bands kind of came out and I would say even took nu level to that other next level past what Limp Bizkit was doing. And you can't talk about nu metal without referencing some of these other bands, because they really have a huge influence on nu metal, not only from back in the 2000s, but even to this day. I'm talking about bands like Linkin Park, Slipknot, Papa Roach, System of a Down. These bands are still getting major airplay on radio stations today. They're still producing albums and touring. Again, they had a huge influence and impact on nu metal, not only as a subgenre, but even as a culture and subculture going around. I told you, like, let's break out those Jinko jeans. That was part of that subculture, those Jinko jeans. You go into Hot Topic with your friends and you'd see the new Slipknot shirt and everybody would buy it. Slipknot. I mean, I like Slipknot. Say what you will, you may love them, you may hate them, you may think, oh, they're not metal, they're never gonna be metal, but I'm a fan of Slipknot. I first got introduced to them because I saw their debut album at the record store, and I was like, what the heck is this? 9 guys in a band? I'm like, that seems a little overkill. Why would you need 9 guys in a band? I can understand 6, maybe 7 at the most, depending on if you have a keyboardist and maybe a DJ, which a lot of nu metal had. They used some kind of DJ or sampling in their songs. So I checked it out and listened to it, and again, it had that angry, that aggression, and that hard-hitting sound that nu metal was divine. That's the reason why they call it kind of angst-filled subgenre there. and I fell in love with that debut album. It was amazing. I got to see them. I actually got to see them on Halloween night. I went to a concert, and they just happened to be Halloween night, and I thought it was very appropriate to see Slipknot, 9 guys in masks on Halloween night. Like, hey, how more ironic does it get than that? And it was a great show. I somehow got shoved all the way to the front of the stage, and I had a huge bruise on my ribs because I was right up against the rail, and I was right up against Clown. Like, Clown was right in front of me, banging on his drums. And so that was kind of my experience with my early introduction to Slipknot. As their other albums came out, I enjoyed them all. Iowa, again, huge successful album for Slipknot, was their second album. Had some great songs on it. Of course, their sound kind of changed a little over time, especially Corey's vocals. He didn't always scream, and he started more singing into it. And I think that just really evolved Slipknot and kind of made them just relevant over time and still very relevant today. Linkin Park, Hybrid Theory, come on. When that album came out, everybody was starting to learn how to play One Step Closer on the guitar. That was just the thing to do. And of course, the new, what's happening now with Linkin Park with the new singer keeps kind of moving Linkin Park in that next direction for them. But I loved Hybrid Theory. To me, that's just going to always be Linkin Park, even as their other albums came out. And again, another band that definitely had their sound change and evolve over the albums. But they had a huge influence back in the early 2000s on nu metal. You have to just listen to that Hybrid Theory and know, like, okay, it may not have sounded like a Korn or maybe Cold Chamber's first album, but it still had a lot of those nu metal elements to it, and it was fun. It was a fun album. Now, Papa Roach, their hit song Last Resort was the ultimate anthem for angsty teenagers everywhere. It's the perfect song to scream along to your car when you're feeling just a little misunderstood, and that's what that song was for. That's kind of what that nu metal subgenre was for, especially in that late 90s, early 2000s. Let's talk a little controversies. And I'm going to talk about a couple of different controversies. One, I'm going to talk about the controversy of just nu metal as a subgenre. It gets so much hate. It gets so much criticism from a lot of metal fans. And I can understand. I can see that, because it was sounding nothing like what metal had sounded before. And even what some metal bands are doing today. A lot of metal bands are kind of sounding like the classic thrash metal bands, or just classic heavy metal bands, incorporating those solos, those blast beats, some growling vocals in there. I mean, yeah, I'll be honest, man, throw in some death metal on and I'm pumped as much as the next metalhead. But I mean, nu metal had an impact on heavy metal. It kind of helped revive it a little bit and get it back in that mainstream again. I mean, look at the bands that kind of started out in that nu metal and how big they are now. Like I said, the influences of Slipknot, Linkin Park, System of a Down, huge influences, and it's all because of nu metal. And so, like I said, I understand what some of those controversies come about, why some people hate it. I get it. I'll be honest, it's not my favorite subgenre, and what's funny and almost kind of sometimes just irks me just a little bit is when I tell people, like, hey, I love heavy metal music. A lot of them automatically are like, oh, do you like System of a Down? Do you like Korn? Do you like Limp Bizkit? Do you like Disturbed? And it's like, I like those bands, yeah. The people that I tell it to, they're not metalheads. They're not ingrained in heavy metal, and they only know kind of what is put out there on the mainstream music. And so that's where you can't deny that nu metal had an impact on mainstream music, because you go talk to someone that doesn't really listen to metal but likes the rock stations, or maybe listens to a little bit of rock music, they will probably say, oh yeah, I love Linkin Park, or yeah, Disturbed, I love a couple of songs from them. And you tell them, like, hey, technically that's heavy metal you're listening to. It's a subgenre of heavy metal, but it all goes up to that big umbrella that it is heavy metal. And so that sometimes kind of just irks me a bit, because it's like when I say I love heavy metal, they automatically think I just like that new metal. And while it's a subgenre, I enjoy it. Definitely not my favorite subgenre of heavy metal, but I recognize it for what it is and the impact it has. And yes, I do have some of my favorite bands and favorite albums and songs that do happen to fall under that new metal. And then, of course, one of the bigger controversies, circling around Slipknot, as big as an influence as they were, I'm sure everyone is kind of familiar with the big beef that Mushroomhead and Slipknot had coming into the early 2000s, especially as Slipknot was really kind of taking big and getting big, kind of being a little bit more well known than Mushroomhead, even though Mushroomhead technically came out first. There was that big kind of that beef amongst the fans that just sometimes got a little out of hand. I'm not going to really talk too much about it because it is very well documented online. Just do a quick search for Mushroomhead versus Slipknot and you'll get all the information you want. There you have new metal. So how can you enjoy new metal? Honestly, it's just like whatever you like with it. I get, like I said, new metal had its mainstream moments. It was there at the forefront in the early 2000s, and those bands are still doing things today. So enjoy it, listen to it. I still enjoy, basically, I'm more closer to the pioneer bands. I love Korn, like Limp Bizkit. I would say out of the influencers, Slipknot, System of a Down, and Disturbed are probably my favorite ones that kind of really brought new metal bigger, and that I still catch myself listening to today, and maybe have a few songs liked on some playlists that I have. So really, just enjoy it how you want to enjoy it. And maybe, new metal is not your subgenre, and I get it. I could totally understand if I said, hey, you like new metal? And you're like, oh, hell no, new metal just gotta go. I wish it's like a stain on the heavy metal community. And I'm like, I get it. I know what you mean. But there are others that love it. And hey, that's great that you love it. And if that's the only subgenre of metal you like, that's awesome, because that's what I love about heavy metal music, is it is so diverse that somebody, no matter what your favorite style of music is, you could probably find at least one band or even at least one song that would fall under the major umbrella of heavy metal. And to me, that's why I'm going to always love heavy metal music. Alright, metalheads, leave a comment. Let me know what you think about new metal. Do you love it? Do you hate it? Let me know. I'd love to hear from you. Also, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, hit the cowbell to make sure you're notified of when new videos come, and thanks always for checking out Album Anarchy.